also just find like a friend who's just as nerdy as you, and just get into arguments with them about like anything you can find, because that really gets you to kind of think about what you're saying, and like step through some of that critical thinking. And you do it every day in school, as well. So don't feel too stressed about having to like really hone those skills, because they've been honed over the last 12 years.
Yeah, exactly. And it can be as easy as like reading a few articles, because in the LNAT,
Yeah.
you do get like sections of articles and stuff. So just, reading when you can is always quite helpful as well. Next question. What are typical interview questions like?
I guess there isn't, because it depends on what college you go to. So it's difficult for us to like sort of give a generalized answer to that. But I guess we could just go through what we had. But I got two different interviews, so two texts. One of them was a problem question like we'd get now when we're studying. So there's sort of a list of facts and you have to apply, I think it was statutes to it. And the other one was so random. It was about like the sugar tax or something. It was an article. So again, like we were saying for the LNAT, don't feel like you're not going to be able to revise content before your interview. They'll give you something that's going to maybe put you out your comfort zone, and you just sort of get that reading time beforehand and do the best you possibly can when you're sort of thinking about what you're reading.
Mine was quite different. So my two were both based on cases that I was given an hour beforehand to read. So again, it was completely blind, had no idea what was coming. So one case was on like financial sort of scenario, and another one was a criminal case. And then the interview was just kind of asking me to sort of go through the facts and what were the different points that the judges were making. So it was a literal lifted judgment. Either one was from the Court of Appeal, one was from the Supreme Court. And then the rest of the interview was kind of playing around with the facts. So I was given some like different scenarios. So if this thing was different, how would the case be decided differently? Would it be decided differently? Should it be decided differently? That kind of thing. So again, it's not really things that you can prepare for. I think kind of what we've been saying before, just practice trying to see things from different perspectives. Because at one point in my interview, I was asked to argue one thing, or what my opinion was. So I gave my opinion, and then I was asked to argue the opposite opinion. So kind of practice trying to see different sides of things when you're reading articles, or even just in general in school, what you're looking at. Think of different perspectives and how you can justify those. And I think that's probably the best thing you can do that will help.
Yeah, my first interview was very similar to Katie's, actually. I was given 15 minutes to read a statute and like a little problem case. And then I went into the interview and he was like, what's the case for the defense? And then what's the case for the prosecution? So you do have to be able to sort of come at things from both sides, but it's very much, we just talked through the case, talked through the law a little bit, asked me to pick out specific bits of the law which I thought could help the case. So that's sort of that critical thinking, that like close reading. But I completely agree with the fact that you really can't prepare for it. And the whole point of the interview is it's really hard to prepare for. My second interview, I didn't even have any reading. We talked a little bit about my personal statement. So obviously it's good to beforehand just brush up on your personal statement, make sure you sort of know what you're talking about. And then we just had a series of questions. We started off quite simple with, if someone wrongly transferred money into your account, should you be obliged to give it back? And we started with that very simple premise and then kept building, and it got more and more complex. And I had to justify my position or perhaps change position a few times through the interview. I definitely think you shouldn't be afraid to sort of change your mind. Like they don't want to see stubbornness. They want to sort of see you think about what you're saying and think, oh, maybe that's not right. Maybe it is. And just be quite thoughtful in what you're saying. But yeah, I do agree that you just can't really prepare for it, and you've just got to sort of go in and be quite open-minded and ready to come at things from both sides.
Yeah, so I had a similar situation in my interview. So I had 3 lots of reading before I went in, and I think they were judgments or cases or something, I can't quite remember it. But then you go in and they ask you a few bits about the case that you've read, but then they sort of add on questions to that. So just try and push you, apply it to different scenarios. I think one was like, should we limit the amount of chocolate that people consume? You think, oh, that's quite a strange question, but once you start thinking about it, and you kind of have to argue that point. You're like, I've never thought about that before. How do I make a case for this? And they're just trying to test you and sort of push you to think about things. So yeah, but once again, you can't prepare for it. They're just trying to see how you think, and they might give you a strange question, but that's because they think you'll never have thought about it. So you just have to think on your feet and think, how could I argue this question? And also don't be afraid to change your mind. Like I did that so many times.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with all of that. For my interview, I actually did it online. And so I think this goes back to one of the other questions that was asked. But basically for my first one, I was emailed like a bit of a judgment from a case. And I read that, and then 20 minutes later they called me on the phone. And then as everyone said, like we kind of just talked through the judgment, and they asked me to like pick out the key bits and the key arguments and the logic that the judges relied on. So it, like, a lot of it just felt like reading comprehension and like that critical thinking. And then for my second interview, I didn't have any reading beforehand, but they like dictated an excerpt of legislation to me, and I just like wrote that down, and then it was the definition of theft, and then we talked about that. So yeah, I guess that's how it works online. But yeah, as everyone has said, you can't really prepare for it. It's more just just try and think on your feet.
Just thought I'd add quickly as well, don't be afraid to sort of ask questions. Like I had a few times in the interview where the interviewer asked a question, but like one of them put it in quite fancy language, and I just said to him, like, I'm really sorry, like I don't understand what you mean. Can you say that a bit simpler? And they're totally happy to rephrase things and talk to you. And I think they'd much rather you sort of ask the questions and asked about the things you're unsure about. So definitely, don't be afraid to ask questions, I'd say.
The other thing I was just going to add quickly, because Nadia was talking about changing your opinion. I think there's probably that like urban myth maybe that they want you to just stick to your point no matter what. And I don't think you should be like trapped into a corner where you get a point and you try and really argue it strongly, and then you kind of, if your reasoning takes you to the conclusion that you're wrong, they're happy to see that from you. You shouldn't feel like you have to just blindly argue a point you don't agree with.
Yeah, okay. Next question, sort of linked. How to best prepare for the interview, what to read up on?
I think the interview is a lot like that LNAT. You can't really prepare for it because you don't know what they're going to ask you. But definitely, I think being on top of the news and sort of reading news articles and things like that can really help you develop that critical thinking, because that's what they're looking for, is the critical thinking. So you can read lots of books and things, but at the end of the day, you don't know what they're going to ask you. It's unlikely, they're really, really unlikely they'll ask you about a specific book. Maybe they do, I don't know, but it's one of those things you just can't entirely prepare for it, but just try and be on top of current affairs and things. I find that does help sometimes.
And like Jessica said earlier, I'd say it's helpful just to really know your personal statement inside out. So really read through it quite a lot before the interview, because they can pick up on things that you wouldn't necessarily think they'd pick up on. So in mine, I wasn't asked that much on my personal statement, just sort of one at the start and one question at the end. But they were on really kind of niche or really small things that I'd mentioned, or things that were from my extracurricular section of my statement. So things that you might not necessarily think they'll pull out. So I'd say just make sure you know your statement inside out, that you're confident on all of it. And if you can, as much as possible, like tie everything back to your subject and be confident on how everything you said ties back to what you believe in, your subject, and like why you're passionate about it. So yeah, just know it inside out. But as Nadia said, there's not that much you can do. Just stay on top of the news and know your own stuff inside out.
Yeah, and going on from that, I know a lot of people put like a lot of books on their personal statement, and obviously these books you've read like a while ago and are not very fresh on, so it's quite good to just make sure you know like roughly what the book is about. Maybe go back over. I think I went over a few of the books I put on my personal statement, just to make sure that if they did ask me about it, it was obvious that I had read the books, because that's a mistake that you don't really want to make, like it's seeming like you haven't read the books. So yeah, I'd say do know your personal statement inside out, and make sure you can talk about all of it as well. And I'd also say it was quite helpful to just have a bit prepared, not like a full-on script because that would be obvious, but a bit prepared for stock questions. So the first question I was asked was, why do you want to study law? And they asked me what I'd study if I didn't want to study law, and then said, well, why aren't you studying that? And I'd sort of thought about this in the days preceding, because there are a few obvious questions that you actually need to think about a bit before you can come up with a coherent answer. So I think it is good to do a little bit of thinking about why actually is it that you want to do your subject, why do you want to go here, and just make sure that you're prepared in that way, I'd say.
Yeah, I guess the personal statement questions, I don't know about the others, but it felt like those were the ones they used to sort of warm you up a bit at the start. So definitely be sure about the content in your personal statement, because it would just be like such a horrible start for you if you're sort of already put off by a question, you know, you maybe weren't expecting about something you put on your personal statement. So yeah, like the others have said, that's probably the only thing you can really brush up on beforehand. And then yeah, I think like I completely agree that you should think about those sort of questions, like why you want to do it, but at the same time it's good not to come off too sort of robotic, like you have over prep, because they want to sort of see how you deal with the situation in the interview, in that pressurized situation. And I think they probably see through it a bit if you're really sort of prepped and just almost sound like you're reading off of a script.
I was just going to add in quickly as well. You can prepare for it. It's good to really think about those questions before you go in. Don't be over prepared, but not all colleges ask you those types of questions. So I had no questions about my personal statement or why law or anything. It's just straight into the text. So be prepared for either situation in which they can ask you about your personal statement, or you just don't talk about it at all. And don't be thrown off if they don't ask you why law, like, oh, maybe they don't like me. It's not like that. They just vary it, keep themselves interested, I suppose.
Yeah, and just going off what Jessica was saying earlier, I saw a question about like how important knowing about like the UK's current affairs is if you're like from a different country, or if you're just like not super up to date. Like I don't think the interviewers would ask you questions specifically about current affairs. It's more just like kind of knowing what's going on around you, and practicing those critical thinking skills a little bit, and just seeming like you're like generally an informed person. So don't stress too much about like knowing exactly what's going on in politics in the UK, for example.
And sorry, just before we go on to the next question, I'd just say, like, from a kind of well-being point of view rather than academic, like, prepare in whatever way is best for you. There are also other things, like, do whatever you need to do to make yourself feel comfortable and confident beforehand, whether that's taking some time out, not doing work, whether that's reading through stuff. Just take some time to make yourself feel confident. Remember that they've asked you there for a reason. It's because they've seen something that they like and they want to find out more. So I think it's worth taking the time just to kind of reflect and kind of get yourself together and get yourself in a sort of positive headspace, and do that in whatever way works for you. It's not all about preparation, isn't just all about the academics. It's making yourself feel comfortable and confident as well.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I just say, like, you know, you don't need to pull an all-nighter before the interview, or like, and in the long run that might be worse for you. So I completely agree. Just make sure that more than anything that you're sort of feeling refreshed and ready to think on the day of the interview is probably one of the most important things. Next question: what do admission tutors look for in an LNAT essay? How can I make my essay stand out?
I guess we've sort of spoken about it a bit already, but I think you get at school, you get stuck in this like particular structure of how to write an essay of introduction, for and against, conclusion. I don't think that's how you should approach an LNAT essay. You should sort of have your point of view right at the start of the essay and have that going all the way through. There's no sort of like one set formula of how to write an essay. They're not expecting you to be university standard before you've even got to university, you know, but all they want to really see is how you go through your reasoning for your argument. And I'm sure that there's obviously a lot of books, and like the we've been saying, that you can read about different structures, but I guess the main thing is just trying to get your point across and maybe try and have an opinion that not everybody else is going to have.
Yeah, and on that, don't worry about making a point, even if it's not necessarily something that you believe in. I think if you can see that something's going to be interesting to say or interesting to make an argument about, it doesn't really matter if that's necessarily something that you would hold as your personal belief. I think try and write something where somebody's going to read that and think, wow, that's really interesting, I didn't see it that way, or oh, I wouldn't have thought of that. I'd say that's more important than necessarily, obviously, like, be true to yourself, but don't worry about writing something that's not necessarily your own point of view.
I'd also say don't worry too much about the points in that, like, I think some people go in and think I need to have like these really exciting, never seen before ideas, and then the question, you know, you get some questions which are like, should school children wear like school uniform, and like you sort of look at it and you think, how can I make an interesting argument? And you don't have to try overly hard to make really, really interesting things, but it is also like, that's good, but at the same time it's about, they want to see how you make an argument as well. So if the substance isn't really that interesting, like I think mine was really boring about like school uniform or something like that, but I sort of made sure that I had my point, and then I explained it and I went through it and I sort of took the reader through my argument. And I think personally that that's sort of what matters the most. They just want to see how you argue and how you think on paper. So I wouldn't stress if it feels like it's hard to make your essay stand out, because I found it was really hard to try and do some incredibly exciting essay. But at the end of the day, as long as you come across well, if you've got a strong line of argument and you can argue well, then I think your essay will be well received.
I think what you were saying about how they want to see how you think is really important as well. One thing that really helped me with the LNAT, particularly the essay, was I think you get 3 questions, or you get a selection of questions. Don't always go for the one you think is the easiest or you have the most to say about, because sometimes that prevents you from really thinking about the question and you just start writing stuff and it doesn't really have any meaning. So I think always try and push yourself to choose a question which kind of makes you scratch your head a bit and think, oh, what is this really about? Because that will make your essay sort of demonstrate how you think, and the tutors want to see how you think. So if you are challenged by the question, generally the answer that you produce might be a bit more sort of, it would just demonstrate more of how you think, and it would just be more sometimes complex because you haven't just thrown everything that you know onto the page.
And on that kind of thing as well, I think it's important to plan. Like yes, you only have 40 minutes, but it's important to just take some time and kind of just brainstorm, like get the kind of splurge of ideas out first, and then you can kind of cherry pick what you actually want to say. I think it might feel like, oh my goodness, I don't have much time, I need to be like actually writing. But if you take the time to plan properly first, it will make your essay much better.
Yeah, and also I guess just don't worry about having to write, X many words. I don't think there's any sort of requirements. Just they'll be so much more interested in a shorter essay where you've really genuinely thought about your points and sort of develop that thinking, rather than, like you said, just blurting out anything you can think of.
And if you are in the situation where you think, oh, I didn't get to finish my essay, or I didn't get to write a conclusion, that happened to me, I didn't quite finish it, don't worry about it, because they'll see what's down on the paper and they won't think, oh, it would have been so much better if they included that final sentence like that summed up their whole argument. They won't think about that. So it's just best to try and get as much down as you can that's interesting, you think will interest you and then also interest the tutors.
Okay, next question. Are LNAT scores for a given admission year published? How long will it be before I receive my individual test results? And what was the average score for students gaining a place?
So I'm not... Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm not sure if they are published. I'm not sure if anyone else knows.
I think Emma's already answered this in the chat because she obviously knows more about the stats and everything, but I don't think the results do get published, no.
Oh, thank you.
And like we said, you find out after your interviews anyway, so don't stress too much about your score.
Okay, what skills did you learn from your high school pre-university education that you think helped you when applying to law school?
That's an interesting one. I think mainly for me it was just not necessarily anything like critical thinking or anything like that. It was just working independently and working hard. I think that's the most important thing you can learn, really. I think a lot of it you'll have to be like, if you're here, you'll have to be quite self-motivated and that kind of thing. So I think if you get used to just working hard and motivating yourself and being quite driven, then that's probably the most useful thing you can do. There was another question on Slido as well about like hard work versus being gifted, and I think hard work sort of comes up top every time. And if you can get used to working hard and working as best you can and in the best way that you can, I think that's the most useful thing you can do, really. That was certainly the most useful thing I got from school. We didn't really have any particularly kind of skills developing programs in my school. I think it was just learning to work hard is the best thing you can do.
Yeah, independence as well. I think that's something you really need in this degree, because a lot of the time you are working on your own and sort of motivating yourself. So I think in sixth form you sort of develop that skill a lot more.
Right. How do you balance individuality and academic knowledge in the personal statement? So personally, I find that what I chose to do for my personal statement was to show my academic knowledge by talking about the law and what I thought about the law. So I sort of argued a point throughout my personal statement, and then I used what I'd done to back it up. So I said, I think this and this, which is a bit of individuality, and then reasons why I thought it sort of came back to my academic knowledge. So I think that worked for me to mix it together, but you do have to sort of find your own way to balance you and what you think versus what you've done, because at the end of the day, they are interested in what you think, and that's why they invite you to interview to sort of see how your mind works. So there definitely should be a good balance of individuality and academic knowledge, but you can go about different ways of doing this. I just made a point and argued it, but you can do this different ways.
Yeah, I completely agree. They don't want to just see a list of what you've done. Like that doesn't really show what you've learned. They want to see, in your personal statement, you want to say, I've done this, and from that I've learned, and this interested me because, or that led me on to look at this, that kind of thing. They just want to see what you've gained from any experience you've had. So that could be a part-time job, or it could be, I don't know, visiting a course or something. Just everything that you've done, try and find a way to demonstrate what you've learned from that or what you've gained from it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I don't think there's like one thing that we can all say that would answer that question, because like as Jessica said, like everyone's personal statement is going to be a little bit different. But yeah, like for example, in my personal statement, like I hadn't actually read any like books about the law, but I'd had like other experiences. So as long as you're kind of able to kind of create a narrative about how your experiences have maybe made you interested in the law, like that's kind of what I would say they're looking for. But yeah, there's no like one formula, and I don't think like there is really a concrete answer to that question.
All right, I think we're going to have to finish off there as it's 1 now. But thank you everyone for your questions. It's been really nice to answer them all, and enjoy the rest of the open day, I guess.
Yeah, good luck, guys.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, thank you. Good luck.
Thank you, Lolas.